Alright, now since you have all your tools installed, let's start making your first project. We're just going to create this one right on our desktop. You might want to make a folder in your documents, maybe called www or website projects or whatever you want to call it. But we're just going to make it here because it's just going to make it simpler to understand how everything works. We're going to call this project, let's just call it Portfolio. So when you first start learning code, it's important that you assign yourself projects. And sometimes it can be hard to come up with what these projects are. So this project that we're going to work on together is just to start your online portfolio. I know you might not have a lot to put in your portfolio right now, but we're just going to get some stock images and some lorem ipsum to fill in the content. We can always go back later and start putting in the real projects that we're working on. So once you have your portfolio folder made, open it up with Atom. So you'll see over here this drop down, you can actually make files. You can name your HTML file anything you want. Typically people name the main file index. So index dot, and this is important, this is what's going to make it into a website file, HTML. So now we have our HTML file made, and if I look on my desktop, you'll see that inside here, there's the HTML file. Now when you start your HTML file, there is kind of a preset structure. It goes something like this, HTML. Well, actually, let me talk about how HTML tags work first. So I would say the basic element would be a square. And if you want to make a square on a website, you do div. But you just don't type div, because if I type div, let me save this real quick, and I'll open this up. When you double click this, it should open up with Chrome. If it doesn't, just right click, open up with Chrome. Okay. But you see how we get the word div there? And we don't really want the word, we actually want a square. So what we're going to do is open bracket, div, ending bracket. And for everything that you open, you also have to close. So it looks like this. Then you put your content goes in here. So this is a square. If I save this and I refresh, you can't actually see the square because it has no dimensions yet. That's actually what CSS does, which we're going to be talking about in this tutorial as well. HTML is the structure of the website, and CSS is how it looks. Now, this isn't going to be a full HTML and CSS tutorial. This is just going to get you in the mindset of the workflow. To learn more HTML, all you really have to do is type in W3 HTML, and there's a whole HTML tutorial. This is actually what we're about to talk about right here. This is the main scaffolding for a web page. But you'll see over here all of the different topics it covers. Headings to make big text. You wrap them in H1s. You can push try yourself and it will show you what it looks like. So these big words are the H1s and these smaller words are the paragraphs. And then these lines are the HRs, the horizontal rules. Anyway, let's go back to our project. In the first tutorial, I talked about plugins, and I talked about one of my favorite plugins, which is called Emmet. So if you're using Atom, you can go to Preferences, Install Packages, and type in Emmet. And the Emmet plugin will come up and you can install it. I already have it installed. One of the useful features of Emmet is you can just type an exclamation point and push tab, and it's going to generate your whole scaffolding. You don't really need to use all of this. You can actually take this out, so this pretty much is the main scaffolding. And actually, you don't even really need this up here. So let's just break this apart a little bit more and let's talk about it. This is telling the browser what kind of document it's going to be. this is the main wrapper of all of the HTML. This is your head. This is where you're going to put your CSS for all your styles. This is where you're going to import stuff that you want to use in your page. And your body, this is what you see on your page. Now the title right here that you see in the head, here, let me just change this real quick. Test. And you see up here where it says index.html, if I refresh this, now it says test. So this is a little bit different. This is something that you see, but it's not actually inside of the main document. So if I added an H1 here, test, you'll see that that shows up in the main document. So if we didn't have Emmet, we would do doc type, and it's an HTML document. We do HTML. That's going to wrap all of the HTML. And we need to have a head. And we need to have a body. And that's pretty much all you need to start a project. But we're going to go in here and we're going to add a title. My portfolio. And let's just add a title in here. H1 and call it my, we could just say portfolio. Okay, good. So let's make that square that we were talking about. In order to do that, you're going to have to use CSS. And you can put that right here. You can do style, and you can just start coding CSS right here. Whoops, that kind of got rid of my words. So you can put it right there inside the head, but it can kind of get a little messy. So it's good to put your CSS in a separate file. Usually what people call their main CSS file is style. So style.css, that's the extension. And now we have our style.css. And we can go back here and get rid of this. Let me actually take my CSS and put it over here. So this is my HTML, this is my CSS. So what you can actually do is you can select elements. So HTML, you can't really select head because you don't see the head, but you can select the body, the H1s, or you can select multiple ones as well. So let's select the HTML and the body. So you can start assigning key value pairs here and start defining what you want the look of your page to be. I think this is pre-installed with Atom, but in CSS, when you start typing a key, it will auto guess what you want. So you can go through here and kind of see what there is to work with. I'm going to affect the color, the background color. So the background color will take certain words like red or black or simple colors like that. Or you can use what's called a hex color. So it starts with a hashtag, and then the first two digits are the red, the second two are the blue, and then there's the green. And it goes from 0 to 9, and then A to F, F being the highest. I typed FF, that would be for the reds, and then the rest are 0, 0, 0, 0. This one should just be red. The reason that nothing's happening is because I haven't hooked my CSS up to my HTML. So let's just do that. To do that, all we need to do is do link and then add a type. It's going to be a text/CSS, and then it's href, which you put the name of the file in there. We named it style.css. And there are a few tags that actually don't have to be closed. When I say closed, I mean like title. Title has an opening and a close, so does head. The majority of tags do, but link is one of the ones that doesn't. And how this would be a self-closing tag, so what you do is at the end you put the / and then just end it. Oh yeah, and one more thing it needs is an rel style sheet. That's kind of one that never really like stuck with me, and it's just one of those ones that you kind of have to remember, kind of like making the scaffolding and this doc type up here and stuff. They're kind of smaller, so they're kind of hard to remember, but once you do it a few times, they'll stick with you. Make sure you have your link, and the parameters are type, text/CSS, and it's relative to a style sheet, and the href is wherever your file is located and what the file name is. These are in the same folder, so it's just style.css. Now we have our style sheet hooked up to our HTML page. That red looks a little bit crazy. Let's go back to here. Let's get rid of this. And let's replace this background color with an image. There's this website I like to use called Subtle Pattern. Yep. We go here. Yeah, these are really cool. You can preview them right on the page too. Anyways, let's just use this first one. Push download. Unzip it. Take this image. Let's go to our desktop and put it inside of our folder. We'll make a new folder called images. That way we can store all of our images in there. I can show you how to redirect a link if it's in a folder. So we'll just paste this in here. Cool. Up here at the top, if there's a blue dot, it's saying that it's not saved. Let's add that image in there. We'll say background. You can already see right there, background image. URL. So if you're familiar with the internet, you probably know what a URL is. Let's just look up a subtle pattern on Google real quick. Images. And we'll just copy image URL or copy image address. And we can paste that right in there. I'll make this full screen again. So if we save this, we can see that our image is the background now. Now that's for an external image on a different website, but our image is inside this images folder, and it's called intersection.png. So what we're going to want to do is type in the folder name, images, and intersection.png. Awesome. Now I'm thinking maybe we could put a white container box here and we can put all our content inside of it. So in the beginning of the tutorial I was saying that a div is a box. So let's start creating that box now. We'll make a div. And inside that div we'll put an h1 just so we can see something inside of it. I don't say portfolio. Go back to here. Now if we go here and we refresh, we see that we only have the text and we don't really see the box. The reason that you don't see the box is because we haven't told our CSS to style it like anything yet. Now you can say div and background color and set a background color. You can use the word white or you can use the hex color FFF. They're the same thing. Now let's make this look a little better. So this works, this div, when we just call the div because there's only one div, but we're probably going to want to make more divs. We're going to want to have different squares in different places and different shapes and different background colors and stuff like that. What you're going to want to do is just start assigning classes and IDs. Now a class is something that you give to a lot of things. So say we have a navigation bar. The navigation bar would actually have an ID because there's only one. But inside the navigation bar, you'll have buttons. You'd want to give all of them the class of button because there's a lot of them. This main wrapper right here, we're probably not going to have another one of these. So we don't actually need to give it a class. We can give it an ID of... When you start programming, you're going to understand that one of the hardest things is coming up with variable names. In this case, I'm just going to call this main wrapper. And this will still work, but what we want to do is go in here and add the hashtag main wrapper. Now these rules in between these curly boys is only going to apply to this div. I don't know about you, but when I first started web development, I expected this box to be right around the word portfolio and not completely across the screen. The reason that it's all the way across the screen is because its display is a block. This is going to be kind of a new concept and it's going to take a minute to get used to. But usually all HTML elements start out as blocks, and you can change them just by changing the display on that element in the CSS. And to make it act how you'd expect it to act, you change it to inline block. You might not notice this right now, but what I'm doing is I'm pressing Command R to get these updates. If you're working on a page and you're pressing Command R and you're not getting the update, it's probably because your browser's caching that CSS. And the same thing with JavaScript in the future. So what you're going to want to do is right-click the page, push Inspect, go up here, and say Empty Cache and Hard Reload. And when you do that, you should get your most current version. That's just a thing that it took me a minute when I first started coding to figure out. I'd be coding something and changing the CSS, and I couldn't figure out what the heck was going on. And it was just that I had to clear my cache. And now since we have the developer tools open, we can see our HTML that we've written, and we can drop these DOM elements down, and we can view elements individually and see how they're reacting. So what I was actually thinking was this box being 50% of the width and centered within the whole page. So let's get rid of this inline block for a minute, and we'll set the width to 50%. I don't know if you can see this, but there's this weird, another pattern right here. Oh, it's because of the body and the HTML. You gotta take the HTML out and just make it the body. There we go. One of the reasons that I do that is because if you go back here, you'll notice that there's this margin right here on the whole thing. You'd expect that with no code on this page that this box would be right up here in this corner, but it's not. Kind of weird. So the reason that I call HTML body is to what they call normalize the page. So I usually set the margin to 0 pixels and the padding to 0 pixels. Padding 0 pixels. So when I refresh this, see how it goes up in the corner? Now the reason it won't go on the top is probably because of this H1 here. If I remove this H1, whoops, let's give this a height too. Maybe a height of 25 pixels. There we go. We can see it's all the way up in the corner now. The reason that there was a spacing on top is because of that H1 attached to them. So certain elements have style attributes already attached to them. I personally wish it just made the text bigger. There's a ton to learn with HTML, which you're probably going to want to go off and learn after you watch this video. But once you start getting into it, you'll come into different problems and come back and watch this video. And this might help you solve some of those problems that you get when you're first getting into building HTML and CSS pages. Now you can do the same thing with CSS. Just type in CSS W3. And they have a bunch of CSS tutorials, borders, margins, paddings, heights, widths, pretty much everything you need to know to fully manipulate the page any way you want it. So we have this all the way up in the corner now. We have it 50% of the page. You see when I shrink down my developer tools that div expands. But we need that div centered. So there's this thing called margin. And if you just give it one parameter, it will apply to all the way around it. So 25. This margin is how far away from the outer elements it is. So you'll see that this should be 25 pixels from this wall and 25 pixels from this wall now. And the same thing applies to this side of it. Actually, if I take my mouse over top of it, you'll see all of the orange is the margin. Now you can also go all the way around it. So if I did 25 pixels, 25 pixels, 25 pixels, that would be the top, right, bottom, left. This wouldn't make much sense to do because you could just use one, but maybe you want the top to be 25, the right to be 25, the bottom to be 25, and the left to be only 5. So you see over here on this left side, it should go down to about 5 pixels from the edge. Also, instead of passing it 4 parameters, you can also pass it 2 parameters. You could say 25 pixels by 5 pixels. And the first one is the top and bottom, and the second one is the left and right. So this would kind of do the same thing, except for there's 5 pixel margin on this side now. Another thing that you can do is pass it a parameter called auto. And auto is kind of like an auto centering tool. This will be 25 pixels on the top and bottom, and auto, it will be auto on the left and right. So what it's going to do is automatically center it. I don't know if that makes much sense to you right now. It's kind of hard to explain. Here, let's actually just look it up. Margin auto. See, this is all he's using it for too. Then you can set the left and right margins to auto to horizontally center the element to its container. But what does auto actually do? Let's search here for auto. You can set a margin property to auto to horizontally center the element within its container. The element will then take up the specified width, and the remaining space will be split equally between left and right margins. Yeah, I think that's all it's used for, actually. Let's start adding some content to our wrapper now. We'll add our H1 back in here. My portfolio. Uh-oh, it's not containing this information anymore. The reason that it's not containing this is because I set a set height on here of 25 pixels. So this is only going to go to 25 pixels, but if I don't have anything set to it, it will just adjust to whatever the size of the content is inside. So margin is the outside. This is 25 pixels from the top, 25 pixels from the bottom, and padding is the inside. So I can set padding to 15 pixels, and that will mean it will be 15 pixels on the top, left, bottom. The same structure works for this as the margin. I could do 4 parameters, I could do 2 parameters, I could just do 1. Let's refresh it. Yeah, that's a little too much. Maybe 5. I'm not a really big fan of this H1. You'll see if you click on it, remember that orange is actually the margin. If you look right here, it has a 21.4 margin. It's because that H1 is already pre-assigned that value. So you can add comments inside your CSS by doing /*, and we can just say normalize, and then * / to end it. So we'll normalize the body in the HTML, and then we'll normalize the H1s too. And we'll just say margin 0. That's better. And since we're here, we might as well do the H2s and the H3s if we ever decide to use them. Those are just different size headers, but they also have their own pre-assigned margins. I think if you actually go to Google and you type in Normalize CSS, yeah, the first link is to GitHub, normalize.css. They set the margin to 0. See, they set the margins to all the H1s to 0, or not 0, but There's also different measurements that you're going to have to learn. EM is one of them. Pixels is another. You can use percents. There's another one called VH and VW. So you could actually just download this file here, this CSS, and then inside of your HTML, you could just put your normalize.css before your other CSS, and then everything would be normalized. But I don't have it downloaded, so we're just going to be working within the CSS that we're creating. Back to our portfolio, let's center this text in here. So we have our H1 inside of our main wrapper. Let's give this an ID of page header. And in our CSS, let's add another note to app, of just app. It's not going to be a big app, so we're doing our normalizing up here, and then all of our app stuff down here. I'm going to put this back over here on this side so we can look at both of them at the same time. Now, what we want to do is we want to select this H1, and we gave it an ID. So we're going to type H1 hashtag, and then whatever the ID is, page header. And we'll start putting in our attributes. Now you can see that we're actually manipulating the H1 twice. Right here, we're giving it a margin of 0, and then we're also manipulating it here. This one up here is affecting all of the H1s by giving them the margin of 0. That's why we're normalizing it. And this one down here is just specifically this H1 with this ID, because you only give IDs to one thing. You give classes to a bunch of things. So what we want to do is we want to center this word in this div. So we can use that margin, 0 pixels on the top and bottom, and auto on the left and right. If we put our mouse above it, you'll see that the H1 actually is a block already. So it takes up 100% of this width. We could change the display to an inline block, and it will only wrap right around that word, but the problem with that is margin doesn't really affect inline blocks like that. So I think the best approach would be to add the text align center to the element. Text align center. Let it be a block, so it's going to be 100% width of this whole thing, and then we'll just align the text to the center of it. Save this. There we go. This font looks a little bit funny, and that's probably one of the things that you're going to want to do right off the bat is get some different fonts, use images, stuff like that. So I showed you subtle patterns to get background images, and for text I like to use Google Fonts. Google Fonts. Okay, what do we want our title to look like? Maybe this one? Let's try it. So we just click on it, we push select this font, click on this little tab down here, and it will open this up. And you'll see that we'll get a little tag to add to our HTML. So we'll add this before our CSS. The reason that we're adding it before is because we want to use this font in our style, and the computer reads from top to bottom. So the computer is going to say, okay, the doc type's HTML, we're starting our HTML, okay, here's the head, change the title, import this font, and then do this CSS. And if we had this CSS before the font, it would say inside of our CSS, use this font, and it wouldn't know what font that is. When we go back to our Google font, you'll see here's the CSS selector. And we're going to add that to our H1 page header. So font family, Merriweather, and then they also have a backup font called Serif. That's just a default font that's installed with most computers. So if for some reason this font's not available, they'll use this one as a backup one. You don't have to have this, but it's just nice to have as a backup. So let's save this, and let's save this. You'll see that there's the blue dot up there. Go back to here and refresh. It looks okay. Let's add some links under here. So let's add another square, a div. We'll give it an ID of social media. And inside this square, we're going to add all of our social media links. Let's make them a button. Let's make each one a div, and we'll give it the class of button. And then we'll make 3 of them. Let's make the first one Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. Oh yeah, can't forget YouTube. Let's save this and see what it looks like. Okay, not very good. If we go over here and we hover above this, you'll see it's a block, so it takes up 100% of the width. And if we drop this down, that each one of these are also blocks. So they're all stacked on top of each other. It's good that this social media is a block because we want it to take up 100% of the width of that, but we don't really want the buttons to be blocks because we want them in a line. We've selected things with IDs. Now we're going to select something with a class. And now you can really see what the difference is between an ID and a class. A class is something that you give to a lot of things, and an ID is something that you give to one thing. So let's make these buttons inline blocks. We do div. So instead of a hashtag, you do a period. And then the class name, button. Let's change the display to inline block. Save it and refresh. There we go. Now this looks better, but let's center these inside the social media. So div hashtag social media text align center. There we go. And let's find another font to use with this one. We'll select this font. Import that font before the style sheet and grab that font family. And instead of just assigning this to the social media links, let's assign this to the whole body. We could assign it to the HTML and body or just the body. It's pretty much the same thing. I'm just going to put it right here in the body because that's where we're doing our background image. Oh yeah, there we go. I wonder if we can do a font weight too. Yeah, that looks better. I've been doing that a lot lately, is changing the font weight to 100. I just like the way that the words are, like, they just look more crisp. So I think these links are a little bit too close to the header. And I think the header is even a little bit too close to the top. So maybe we should add some margin to top and bottom of that. So that's the page header. We could either add margin or we could add padding. Let's just add margin. So on the top and bottom, let's try 15 pixels, and on the left and right, let's just keep that 0 pixels. Okay, that looks better. And you'll notice that these aren't actual links right now, that's just text. So let's turn these into links. How you do that is you would wrap these in an anchor tag. They're A's, and you give it a parameter called href. And I'm just going to set this equal to an hashtag right now so it won't go anywhere. So you see that this A surrounds this whole div. So if I save this, the Facebook should be a link now. But it doesn't go anywhere, it just goes to the hashtag. Let's do the same thing for Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. So if I right click and push beautify editor contents, it goes through and makes everything look nice. So all of these should be links now that go nowhere. So we can start adding the links right inside of our hyperlinks reference. Let's add the Facebook link, http://www. I think it's actually https://facebook.com. https://www.twitter.com. another little atom trick. You can type in multiple places. So you see how my cursor is right there? Or not my cursor, but where I'm at in my current line. That blinking blue indicator right there. I can add another one right here by holding Command. So now I have two. And I can delete both of these at the same time. Then I can paste in the Twitter link to both of them. And I can add Instagram and YouTube. So if I click on YouTube, it takes me to YouTube. But the problem with that is that it takes me to another page. And I kind of want to open up in a new tab because I don't want them leaving my website. You just add another parameter to your anchor tag called target blank. So if I add all of these to here, refresh, and I click on it, you'll see it opens up in a new tab now. Now, these don't look much like buttons. They look more like links. Let's make them look more like buttons. The reason it looks like this is because this is how links are pre-formatted to look. Kind of how the H1 looks, and it has the margin and stuff. The same thing with these links. So we can actually go up here in our Normalize, and we can select all links, and we can set values right here. One of the things you'll notice is that there's this little line, because usually links are underlined. We can get rid of the underline by text, decoration, none. Gets rid of that. We can do the color. 000 is black. There we go. But we might not want all of our links to look like that. Really what we want is all of our links that are inside of this div called social media. So what we can do is, let's move this down here. And this is still selecting all of the anchor tags. But what we can do is we can add div hashtag social media and then the anchor tag after it. This is saying all of the anchor tags that are inside the div with the ID social media. Let's save this, and we should get the same results. Now since we have the links how we want them, let's make them look more like buttons. Maybe we'll add a background color to our button. Maybe a DDD. Oh, a little bit too dark. Maybe an EEE. That looks a little better. You see how these words are right up against the edge? Let's make it so there's a little bit of a padding. Padding 5 pixels. Oh, there we go. I like the padding on the side. I don't like it so much in the top and bottom. So maybe let's set the top and bottom to 2.5. 2.5 pixels, and the left and right be 5 pixels. And when I hover over top of it, I kind of want to do something. The way that you do that is you say all of the divs with the class of button, and you add a hover to the end. And all these parameters will take effect when the button is hovered. So let's change the background color, or we could change the opacity to 0.5, so half. Refresh. There we go. Let's add an image in here. I don't really have any images. For an image, let's use Placeholder. Placeholder is a website that generates images that you can use when you're making mock-ups. So these are what the images look like right here. They're not very fancy, but they'll hold the place of the image in the meanwhile. So let's try this one. 350 by 150. And we want to put the image right below our navigation. Let's close out of our CSS. And our HTML file is kind of getting a little big and a little bit more complex. So let's start adding some notes. That way we know what everything's doing. that breaks it up a little bit better, and we can see where the different elements are just by looking at this gray text. Let's add another one. And image is actually another HTML element that doesn't have an ending tag. We talked about this earlier with the link tag, how this doesn't have an ending. Pretty much every other element, like the body, has an ending. All the divs have endings. H1s have endings. The anchor tags have endings. Images don't have endings. So it's just image and then src for the source of the image, and we'll paste in that link that we have to that image. And with self-closing tags, you just put a space at the end, /, and then end your element. Let's save this and see what we got. Let's add a little bit more style to this image. That way it's not right up against these links and it's not off to the left. It's more centered in the page. So we can add an ID, header, image. We'll go back over here to our CSS. And we want it centered, so margin, and we kind of want, and we want space in the top and bottom. So let's do 15 pixels by auto. So the reason that this is not working is because images aren't blocks. We were talking about this earlier about how most elements are originally blocks and we have to change them to inline blocks. Kind of how we changed these links to inline blocks so they weren't 100% of the width. Like this is a block because it takes up 100% of this width. Usually when you assign elements in HTML, they're blocks, but images are actually one of the HTML tags that aren't initially defined as blocks. Change the display to a block. Oh yeah, and the other reason that it's not working is because I said H1. If you go over here, it's not an H1, it's an image. While you're doing these types of projects, it's important to keep a sharp eye on those kinds of things. One of the other things that you might slip up on is the semicolons at the end. If I forget a semicolon, it's going to mess up the next line of this statement. So make sure you have all your semicolons and that you're using the proper tags. There we go. And now let's finish this up with a little footer. Add a comment. We can make it a div. Give it an ID of footer text. We'll just say copyright 2017. Let's copy this ID, take it over here to our CSS, div with the ID of footer text. Let's text align at center. We'll change the font size to 0.5 EM. Let's see what that looks like. And let's do a margin bottom of 15 pixels. And there we go, we got our first web page. If I close out of these developer tools, you'll notice that this stays 50%. It changes based off of how big my window is. We might not want this wide. What we can do is we can go back to our main wrapper, because that's what this main container is. And we can say max width 500 pixels. That works. And now when I stretch out my developer tools, it will only get 500 pixels. But the other thing is, when we squish it down, you'll see it gets like this. So we might also want to add a min width. And let's set that to be 350 pixels. There we go. So I hope this helped you learn HTML and CSS a little bit more. a lot of it is in the workflow. I'm using OS X, so all I'm doing is full screening them and using 4 fingers to be able to swipe back and forth. I'm sure if you do more research on whatever operating system you're using, there's something similar to that. So what I would suggest for the next steps is to go out and learn a little bit more HTML, CSS, maybe get an app on your phone that helps you learn it. If you have an iPhone, you can just go to the App Store and type in Learn HTML, Learn CSS, and there's an app made by SoloLearn. It's a really good, fast way to learn HTML, CSS. You can even learn JavaScript there, which is what we're going to go into in the next tutorial. Remember, HTML is the framework, CSS is the way that it looks, and JavaScript is the way that your web page interacts. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments and I'll try to answer them best I can. Another little piece of information I want to leave you with is if you're not looking to do a whole website right now and you just want to mess around with HTML and CSS to get your feet wet, you can head over to jsfiddle.net. And this is a good place to just make little small projects. Maybe you say, I want to make a button. And you can go over here. This is your HTML. This is your CSS. This is your result. This is where your JavaScript goes. We'll learn about that more later. We can say div class button my button. We run it. You'll see we got our text down here now. We can do div class button background color red. Display inline block, color white, padding 5 pixels, or maybe 2.5 by 5 pixels. Here's another little cool one I'll give you. Border radius 5 pixels. This is going to change how smooth these corners are. Maybe change the cursor to pointer. So if you see, if I go over right now, I only get this text select option, but if I change the CSS, now I get the little pointer. You can do the same things with hover in here. Hover, opacity, 0.5. So you kind of get a gist of what you can do inside here. The point is, to learn this kind of stuff, you're going to have to practice. But you're also going to have to do a little bit of digging into literature and online materials to be able to learn the basics. Another thing I didn't really cover in this tutorial, which is really important, is how to search on Google for different things. So if I'm trying to change the color of my text and I'm not sure how to do it, I would go to Google and I would type how to change text color in CSS. And W3 schools will usually pop up, but there's also a website called Stack Overflow. So on Stack Overflow, people ask questions and then other people post responses. So you'll be able to read their question up here, and then the one with the green check mark is the answer. Really, really useful website. You're going to be using this website a ton, Stack Overflow. Whenever you have a code question, just type it into Google and look for the URL Stack Overflow. If you're having a problem with your HTML or CSS, there's probably someone else somewhere in the world that's also had that problem and has asked the question on Stack Overflow. So download the app on your phone, learn some HTML, CSS, go to W3 Schools, read a little bit more into it, and then get on your computer, open up Atom, and start coding your first project.